Okay, just started recording. Thank you. I forgot. I always forget to hit record. Um, so basically, that was just about humans are all the same. Okay, genetically, race is just kind of a construct, and culture is more important. Language is more important. All these different things. So, um, it seems like most of the questions were about that people wanted to talk about were just about the anger and the protest and what do we mean by structural inequality, and why does that matter? Why does the history matter in terms of what's the history behind the things that are happening right now? And I could just say, as a Lord, I've never seen anything like these protests. This is bigger than when Martin Luther King got assassinated. I think social media and just the fact that there are more people has a lot to do with that. Um, this is bigger than the LA riots in 1992 with Rodney King, which was a similar case, except he didn't die. It was just that the beating was so brutal and on videotape. That sparked a lot of protests, but not like this. This is bigger than before. It involves more. It's not just Black people. It seems to be more white people than anything like in the protests right now, which I think is good, um, because it's you know yeah, it's a very different moment. And the other thing is that I think there could be some real reform here, and I think it's that I like the racial dynamics of these protests because people are realizing that it's a bigger issue. And so yeah, so if we can just talk about, like, I have more to say about, I have a lot I could say about structural inequality and race. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Scott，要不要大家一起自我介绍一下？我们作为开始，不然的话，我觉得你就可能那个一直说下去了，对。
Yeah.
Hi, Scott. I do have a question. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. So I'm just wondering, what are your kids asking you nowadays, given the backdrop? And what are you telling them? Are they confused? Are they angry? Are they what are they asking you? Thanks.
Good question. Well, they're a little bit different. They both want to understand why this is happening. Like, the one thing about my kids is that I keep them posted on the news. So like they kind of know what's happening. Leah, who was 11, is a little more politically she's a little more politically interested than Kai is. Kai wants to understand what's happening, and he kind of does. Leah is more, I think Leah was a little angry. Like, one of the reasons, like, there was a couple of days ago when Leah was just very grouchy and frustrated, and some things happened in the house. And it turns out what she was upset about was that she was going on social media when she goes on TikTok like once or twice a day, and she sees that that's all anyone's talking about, and it just made her angry. And plus, she's had her own social experiences, not of racism or necessarily discrimination, but she gets a lot of questions at our school, which is predominantly Asian and white, and there are only like 4 Black kids in the entire school. And so she gets a lot of social pressure about her hair and how she wears it, and people ask her about it. And so she's she's just socially more conscious of race because she has stresses that, boys don't really notice it at age 9 yet. They don't really talk about that kind of stuff. And so she was really angry about what was happening and felt that it was unfair. And so I just asked her, do you want to make some posters? So she made, she used her art to make posters. But, I tell them the history. I tell them the same thing I'm telling you guys when you ask me questions, like what's the history of it and why is it so frustrating? And I tell them my experiences. I've never experienced violent racism, but when I was at Stanford, I would get pulled over. I told them about the time at Stanford when I got pulled over on my bicycle, and the policeman made me demonstrate that I had the key to the lock, for no other reason, just to prove that I didn't steal this bicycle in Palo Alto. And, and so I asked them, how would you react in that situation? Because you hear Black people talk about the talk, we call it, that you have to give your kids. There are certain ways that you have to react with police officers because they're not friendly to us like other people. And I just put it frankly, like they automatically, when they see Black men especially, you must have done something. I'm just going to keep asking you questions until you admit what you did, right? Or you start running and then I can shoot you or something. So I calmly, I told him, I just opened the lock and I said, is there anything else? And he said, where are you? And then they started asking me these questions, like, where are you going? Like, where are you? And I told them, I'm going to Stanford. I'm a student there. And I showed them my ID, and that ended it, right? So I had to demonstrate my social status because they immediately assumed that I was in the wrong neighborhood. I didn't belong there. I stole this bicycle. And that was purely based on the fact that I'm a Black man, right? And so take that and multiply it times 10,000 over the course of someone's lives. Yeah, it's frustrating, right? It's like, I should have the right to not be stopped by police when I'm just going about my day. I could tell you about time I've been pulled over in Irvine that way. So I don't want to get into that, but it's kind of, we all have stories like that, and it's, if you've never experienced it, you don't know what it feels like, and that's where the frustration comes from, and that's what I talk to my kids about. It's, we're not allowed to be angry in public. Some people tell their kids, don't run. People tell Black sons, don't ever run in public because you're just making yourself a target. Like, you'd be playing with your friends and someone, oh, hey, you took my backpack, run down the street chasing them. Someone that you run past is going to call the police because it's just weird to see Black men running in public unless they're obviously jogging. But even jogging, the Aubrey case from a few weeks before George Floyd, right? He was just jogging through the neighborhood. Two white men stopped him and said, what are you doing here? So did you rob these houses or something? And then they ended up killing him. And then no one arrested him until the video went viral, right? So, it's just things like that. And it's not every day, it's not always, but when you hear statistics, like, I'm more likely to be killed by police despite my education, my income level, everything. I'm more likely to be killed by police than I am to win the lottery, right? So every time I leave the house, I'm buying a lottery ticket in the police death pool, right? And that's way more likely than me winning the lottery, right? And despite the fact that I don't, not committing a crime or anything. So we have to prepare them. It's just the thing that other people in public spaces are afforded, I don't want to call it privileges, but just expectations that everyone should have. But then some people don't get that, and that doesn't track your income. When I get pulled over by police, they don't care that I have a PhD. Like, they don't, especially now, I have a really nice car right now. Like, it actually makes me kind of nervous. They might think I'm a drug dealer, right, or something, because it just looks weird. That's, so, but yeah. So anyway, that's what we talk about. Leah is very savvy on these things. She reads news and she gets angry like me. She's my little political buddy. Like, we we talk politics a lot. Kai's not as interested in it yet, but he still knows. So I just want to make sure they know the history, but also I want them to protect themselves. Like, that's something that all Black parents have to worry about. Like, the police we see the police differently, even when we don't commit crimes. It's just something we worry about. And yeah, it doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen that often. Hasn't happened recently, but it's something they need to be prepared for, because all it takes is one time for them to end up on Twitter in a video with a knee on, with the knee on the back of their necks. There was a video yesterday of a Black woman who was asking she needed help to get her car registration, and she got angry with the way the policeman was talking to her, the white police officer, and he pulls her out of the car. He throws her on the ground, and he put his arm, he laid on top of her back. He was much bigger than her. He laid on top of her back, put his arm around her neck, and then put a lock chokehold until she passed out. And that was from 2 years ago, but the video became very popular yesterday. And 2 years later, so he got suspended, but it took 2 years. And so why does it always take a video? So I'll end with this. I don't want to talk forever, but I told them yesterday, we were talking, I told both of them, when they don't have cell phones yet, but when they do get cell phones, I told them, don't ever leave the house without your cell phone being charged, because that's the most powerful weapon Black people have against police, because otherwise nothing ever happens, right? When these cases happen, it's not until the video goes public that anything, that police officers pay any kind of consequences for killing people with unnecessary force and things. So does that answer the question? I mean, yeah. So basically, I tell them the same things I tell everyone when I talk about it, but for them, it's personal, and it's, for Kai especially, being a boy, it's something we worry about. Some people don't understand it; they don't get it. But this country has a long history of public executions of Black men, and before about 1930s, it was totally acceptable among white people. And I could show you pictures of postcards. It's not, I can share my screen. Let's see. Yeah, it's just a picture like let's see. Where's okay. So it's kind of graphic. I'll warn you, one of these pictures is a little, let's see. Yeah, like this, it's what resonated with, so how you have the George Floyd situation. It reminded people of these other things. Like this is a postcard that people would send on when they were on vacation and things, and like it's 1891. So basically, what is that, 110 years ago? Notice that, it's a black man hanging. Usually it's because they looked at a white woman, or someone had an affair with a white woman and then they got caught and the white woman says he raped me or something, and that's all it takes, right? No trial, no police or anything. The whole town would just lynch them. And you notice there's kids there, they're dressed up. This is a Sunday outing. This is, and this is what it reminds people of, because this lasted 9 minutes. And everybody in the world is watching this happen. And that's the thing, like, it's not just the economics and the structural racism and things like that. There's a history of this happening in America, and this is, so I'll take it down, but it's, so let me go back to Zoom. How do I, oh, okay. So, there's a whole history of that kind of thing, and it's that's what it reminded people of, and that's why people are so angry, because this happened, like between 1882 and 1968. There were 4,743 of those events, and they were public, and they were made into postcards and things, and people felt, it became a party. So they would leave the body hanging, and then they would have a barbecue, and then take pictures with the body and stuff. And so collectively, African Americans, we remember this, because to us, it never stopped. And so whenever this happens in inner cities, it reminds, our community has not forgotten that this happened. It's almost like, I was talking to my wife this morning, like slavery and everything that happened afterwards, up until the civil rights movement through Jim Crow. It's kind of like, it's kind of like what the Japanese did in Nanjing, right? Like, except we still live with our Japanese, right? We still, those people did those things to my people, and we still live with them, and we have to not forget. And so when things like George Floyd happens, we remember, and it's very vivid, and it's we get very emotional about it. And so that's what some of the anger is about, that it seems like that's still happening, because police officers normally don't face any consequences. And so I'm happy that white people are protesting too, because that's the only way things are going to change, that we won't reform. People are saying defund the police, but they don't mean take away all funding. I think they just mean bring back community policing, like get them more training if they need it, or restructure them to be less like the military, because they're acting like the military, and that black people in poor neighborhoods are the enemy, or black people anywhere, really. So anyway, okay. I'm trying not to just keep talking. But, yeah.
So can I just follow up on that, the policing? Is there a part of the country that you can point to, say, okay, this part of the city or this part of the police department has really done a fantastic job in terms of community relationship and how they enforce?
Yeah, there are some examples. I don't offhand, I don't know. I think Atlanta has done a very good job of doing this. Atlanta has problems, but Atlanta, and one of the reasons is maybe it's because Atlanta it's a very black city. Atlanta is the blackest city in America. So across all social economic class, poor, middle class, rich, like the majority is black in Atlanta. And the mayor and the governor, the mayors in Atlanta, and the mayors in Atlanta over the years, and the governor of Atlanta have done a lot of, they've done a lot of reforms, because they had cases like this too. But Ferguson, Missouri, like after the incident they had 5 years ago, Michael Brown, and then that caused protests and riots, they reformed their police department. Obama's Justice Department did an investigation and said that, okay, this is what's happening. What's happening is, you know, and what their particular problem was that their whole city was running on the finances of fining Black people for minor instances and then sending them to jail if they don't pay them. So parking ticket, don't pay it on time, go to jail, like whatever. And so people were just racking up these huge bills for parking violations, speeding tickets, like all these minor infractions. And it just turned out, and they admitted it, like, yeah, this is how we were financing the city. And it was leading to a lot of social tension. So eventually they formed a commission that can review the police department. But, you know, if without the protests, would that have happened? You know, it probably wouldn't. And so, you know, these protests that are happening now, I mean, we don't like the violence. I don't like the looting, but, you know, they're effective when you don't have political power. Sometimes it's when you don't have, when you don't have the political power to instantly change policy, then sometimes it's the only way anyone will listen to them. So yeah, Atlanta, Ferguson, Missouri, which is a small town, but it's near St. Louis. Some places, I don't know, like every city has some kind of issue with this, but I don't know which ones have particularly solved it well. That's why the protests are in all 50 states, because all 50 states have some kind of version of this problem. And so I personally think the root is, yeah, there's long-standing racism, but I think the 1990s war on drugs was a really big turning point. And around the same time, there was a new policy the federal government came up with where police departments could buy military equipment, surplus military equipment. And so police departments in cities have just built up all these armored personnel carriers and assault rifles and all these things that police never needed before. And then now all of a sudden they have them. And sometimes I think they look for an excuse to use them. And I think the clashes between police and protesters right now, I think that's part of the problem, that they have all these military devices and weapons and they just want to use them. And yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good question, but I know Atlanta is one city that has a pretty good record. No one's perfect, that to point to. Canada seems to be they seem to be a good model. No, they have their issues too. Native Americans or Native Canadians, First Nations people, like, would have the same complaints about that Black people do in America, but Canada's police seem to be able to do it without. I mean, in England, London, they have issues too, but their police don't even carry guns, so, but they have better gun control laws, in my opinion. But so I don't know. Yeah, I think the LAPD, Los Angeles' police department, has improved. They still have a long ways to go and they still have trouble, but since 1992, they have improved a lot. And what it takes is working with the community instead of against the community. Like, it doesn't have to be a conflict between police and communities. I think but it takes work to do that. And I think Los Angeles has done a lot of that work, but they still have some work to do. But Los Angeles policing is a lot better than it was in the 1990s. Right now, I think they're less like a gang now than they used to be. Any other? That's about all from that.
Yeah, I want to ask a question. What's your opinion on those Black conservatives like Thomas Sowell, Clarence Thomas, and do you think affirmative action actually hurt Blacks rather than help them? I don't know.
Black conservatives, I don't. That's a hard question because I'm obviously very liberal, like, nothing, but, and most Black academics are, almost all of them, but there are some. For me, you have to split it into pre-Trump liberal conservatives and post-Trump conservatives, because he has kind of just mixed everything up so that, I just say personally, I have much more respect for pre-Trump conservatives, even though back then I didn't like them back then, but now that I see the alternative, like, wow, like, what has happened? Conservative, I don't have a problem with, I think conservatives and liberals have one fundamental disagreement about how governments should be run, and I respect their opinion. That I disagree with them, but I think they have if they're being honest about what they believe and they truly believe that government should step back and let personal responsibility and private industry take over a lot of responsibilities that governments can do, okay, that's fine. I don't agree with that. I'm much more toward, I'm not a socialist, but I believe in socialist principles like Western Europe and things like, I think the state has a fundamental right not to ensure that that some people get rich. I think they have more of a responsibility to make sure everyone's okay, right? Some people will get wealthy, some people won't, but I think there should be a common safety net for everyone so that no one falls through the cracks and becomes homeless or doesn't have health care. I think that's the least you can ask for a government, and not kill people unnecessarily. But so that's the Thomas Sowell, Clarence Thomas conservatives. That's fine. This whole country has been having this argument for 200 years, and I'm on one side of it, but I respect the other side. Some of the more recent people, though, I think in the age of social media, like the Candace Owenses and people like that, I don't respect them, so I don't engage the things that they're saying because I don't know. I think they're just trying to get clicks and be famous, and some of them have even reversed their positions over the years and things like that. So okay, I'm
Yeah.
okay. I think Black people can be as politically diverse as other people. The other half of your question, about affirmative action, I think it has helped. I went to a private university for grad school, Stanford, and they're not subject for affirmative action because they're private school, but they realize that there are historical inequalities that need to be addressed, and they're doing their part. I mean, we ask individuals to do it. To me, to do what they can to help bring about equality by practicing equity, right? So that everyone's on the same playing field, and then we can get rid of things like affirmative action. But we're so far from being on the same playing field that we still need to do things. But I think it helped me because universities like Stanford do want to do what's right to make it so that we don't have to have laws like affirmative action in the future. It has helped. It definitely helped me because I know I wasn't the smartest or the most talented applicant to Stanford that year, but who was? It's the thing. Think about when we talk about affirmative action is that no one in America has the right to choose exactly which university you go to despite your test scores. Like we just don't, it doesn't work that way. And I think universities reserve the right to have diversity, have a diverse student body. Why would they want people who are exactly the same because they all make great scores on the test? That doesn't help them. And for me, I gave a talk to police officers at a port authority, which sounds weird right now, but like I gave a talk to police officers at the port of Long Beach 4 years ago for their diversity day. And I talked about like the key to the importance of diversity is that without diversity, you don't get evolution, right? These animals can't adapt to their environment without genetic mutation. So it's diversity that drives progress, right? It's diversity that drives mutation and change. Without it, everyone would just be the same and nothing would improve, right? And um, so I think affirmative action helps. The only way that it hurts African Americans is that when you get onto a university campus as a Black person, you have a lot of people in the room that think you're only there because of affirmative action and that you don't belong there. And then you get discriminated against. I had someone come up to me at Stanford and say, "You don't belong here," literally to my face, right? Excuse me, sir, is an old white lady. Say, excuse me, sir. I just wanted you to know that you don't belong here, and I hope they stop letting people like you come here. And so what do? Some people would get angry, so then the police would come. I'd be on my back, and I probably wouldn't be sitting here because I would have gotten kicked out. They probably would have arrested me. What did I do? I just said, thank you, have a nice day. That was my response, and I just kept walking, And so that's the only way it hurts Black people, but it didn't stop me because I have a thick skin. I don't care what people think about me. So it, it doesn't, things like that don't bother me that much. But, and it helped me, it helps people get into schools. But, the thing about affirmative action that people who would do something like that don't understand is that once I was there, I still had to do my own work, and I still had to outperform other people. And so you have to prove, it puts pressure on Black students to prove that you're there, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with pressure. Black parents tell their kids all the time, if you go to an elite university, you have to do better than the white students because no one thinks you belong no one thinks you belong there, right? They think even when you have the test scores and when you do have a very strong application and you do outcompete other students, people, just because you're Black or Latino, they think you're only there because of affirmative action and that you're taking someone's spot. So in that way it hurts, but I think it can help close. It has helped close the income gap between white, Latino, and Black. And I have a chart for that I could show, but it has closed the income gap, but that's not the important thing. You can close the income gap within 10 years, and that has happened. Like they do have, Black college graduates do have higher incomes now than they did 10 years ago. What it doesn't help with in a short period of time is the wealth gap. And so the wealth gap has between white families and the average Black family has actually gotten wider since the civil rights movement. And the reason for that is all those policies I mentioned, like redlining and redlining the GI Bill and a lot of other things that have happened that white families were aided in buying property in the mid 20th century, and then their kids inherit that equity, and then their kids have a safety net that other people don't, and it goes. And it's different. It's difficult to see that as a recent immigrant, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, but you know, you have to look at, if you're a recent immigrant professional class, yeah, you have property and you have done all these things in a very short amount of time with but you have PhDs, you're super educated, and you know, you have a high income and are very smart with money. But for those of us who have been here for generations after generations, this gap just gets wider and wider. So even though income is changing, it takes several generations to build up the kind of wealth that white families have, and that's what has happened, and no one is catching up with them. And in fact, and so how does that matter? Well, they have better schools, they have more resources, they have more choice about where they can live, they have more freedom to move around if they're not happy with their schools or with they are protected by the police. They're not being policed, they're being protected. And so yeah.
Can I just
Sure.
can I just interrupt for a second?
Uh-huh.
I mean,
Sorry.
I'm fiscally very conservative, so I just want to mention like a distinction between income and wealth. I totally get what you're saying, but for people to advocate taxing like a big inheritance tax, I think from my perspective, I don't think it's totally fair because it's double taxation. I already paid taxes when I made that income, and it shouldn't be taxed at extraordinary amount of tax when I give it to my children. So I totally get what you're saying. We are all at different starting point, but the reality is the world will never be completely equal, right? So I see what you're saying about generational wealth, but I think there's ways to address it. For example, in the last decade, what is really proven is because the economy has been fairly slow and steady, what is really working is like the housing value went up a lot and the stock market went up a lot. If you don't have the money, you're not going to invest in the house or stock market. Therefore, people who ever had money previously become exponentially more, they become exponentially wealthier nowadays. So I think, you know, policy-wise, maybe you raise the capital gain tax that could level the playing field a little bit. But from where I see this, I see what you're saying, but I think, you know, inheritance, you know, I think it is double taxation. That there's, to some extent, I get why people don't want their share of, you know, they feel like they've worked hard all their lives, and if they haven't, you know, I think, I don't remember what's the inheritance taxation, the threshold. Maybe it's $10 million today. So if I have, when I'm dead, if I have $2 million I want to give to my children, I want that because I already paid my due when I was making that, right? So I just want to make that comment because, you know, everyone comes from different sort of perspective.
Yeah, it is. I mean, in some ways, I remember there was the debate about the estates tax a couple of years ago, and I don't know if that's exactly the same thing that you're talking about. Maybe it is. That, I mean, I agree with you. It could be raised. I don't know because I don't travel in those circles, but I do remember talking about, I think if you have earned a lot of money over the course or accumulated a lot of wealth, you should be able to pass it to your kids, right? And being taxed double is not fair. I think corporate, I'm more interested, like private wealth doesn't concern me that much, although I do think it's weird that, you know, I could, you know, as a socially progressive, you know, like kind of Jeff Bezos having $250 billion, that bothers me. And a lot of people more liberal than me would say like every billionaire is a failure. I don't think that. I mean, he had a good idea, he developed it, he made his money, but I just imagine like, God, yeah, that's his family would be rich for 10 more generations. That's enough. He couldn't even, there's not enough stuff in the world to spend that much money on. So why not help people solve problems? But that's just me. I'm more interested in corporations not paying taxes, because I think corporations, so I'm actually agreeing with you. I think people should be allowed to pay their fair share, whatever the law is at the time. I think the super wealthy should pay more taxes, but we follow the laws we have and we try to change them if we don't agree. That's what the process is all about. We can, we battle it out. That's kind of how the history always has been until the last like 10 years or so. Follow the tax laws, pay what you pay. People like me will try to make you pay more taxes by voting, right? But I think corporations should be, just like individuals should pay their fair share of taxes. And because I know you can say that they create jobs and so they're helping people that way, but to produce their products, they're using resources like fire departments and the police. I mean, why should we working people why should we working class and middle class people pay the salaries of the police, be the only ones paying the salaries of the police and the fire department and fixing the roads? These corporations, they have trucks everywhere. Their trucks rip up the streets and they don't pay taxes to help fix them, right? They don't, when their factories get broken into or their businesses, they call the police just like the rest of us. Why should they not be helping pay for that? So that's the way I stand. I'm not concerned with wealthy people keeping their money. I'm all for it. I'm liberal, but I'm not a communist. So I believe in capitalism, but I think capitalism could be a lot better and more fair for more people. And, to bring it back to the topic, I just think resources, if you look at the history of mid-century of what happened in inner cities, when the suburbs were built after World War II, what happened was the upper and middle class white people left. So they left because Black people started they could afford houses after the war, some of them. And so all it took was one Black person to move into an all-white neighborhood, and then banks would send people into those neighborhoods to talk to white families and say like, hey, there's a Black family down the street. The value of your house is going to drop. You know that, right? And so they would instantly sell it, and they would move to these new suburbs. And then that's where, in my classes when I talk about this, that's where whiteness was born. There was no unified identity of white people until they built suburbs in the 1950s, and people stopped talking about I'm Italian, or I'm Irish, or I'm German, my family's German. They started saying we're just white people, right? And it was in the 1950s. And a lot of earlier histories used to say that the value, the value of houses in cities dropped because Black people moved, but it wasn't because Black people moved in, it was because white people moved out, right? And so when that started happening, it just became this trend. It's called white flight, if you want to look it up. Like the term for it is white flight. They just fled the cities, and when they left, they took their resources with them. And so housing in cities became a rental market, and it just became a pooling place for Black and Latino people. And then when you take the tax money out, then the schools suffer, healthcare suffers, businesses don't want to invest there because the education's so bad, right? So I'm not going to build. Why would I want to open an office in the middle of the city if only poor people, poorly educated people live there? So they started building their businesses in the suburbs, and then later started outsourcing everything to overseas and things. So it's yeah, it's a long answer to a short question. Like, I'm not against wealthy people keeping their money, but I think corporations could do more. I think private individuals, yeah, you're right. If it is double taxing, that is not fair. I would be a hypocrite if I said I was all about fairness and wasn't about. I do believe in personal property, and I think everyone should pay their fair share to maintain the infrastructure of society, like education. I believe healthcare. I was not a Bernie Sanders supporter, but I do believe in universal healthcare. I think it would just be nice if people didn't have to worry about going bankrupt when one of their family members gets sick. And for a lot of us middle class, that's not true. But I mean, hell, I don't know. We're solidly middle class, and if we didn't have healthcare, I mean, we would have spent a lot more money. But there are a lot of people in these communities don't have healthcare. So if someone gets sick, in a lot of cases, they don't pay, they can't pay a $20,000 bill. So then they have to go bankrupt. It ruins their credit. They can't do anything else. And so I think it's just ridiculous that we're the only advanced developed country that doesn't have affordable or universal health care. Is just ridiculous. Like, I think so. But yeah, that's my thing. Like, say, I always get long answers.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt him.他
Just
他
interrupt
总
me.
是这
Okay,
样，所
okay,
以
okay.
在家里我很少有说话的机会。
I know. I let you talk sometimes.
I have a question.
一恒来。
So
是一恒吗？是
this is
不是
Nancy.
OK, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. So the thing that the protests is kind of troubling to me is I don't see a clear message, like a message out of this. Like, I know, like, we're all like against the police brutality, we against the systematic discrimination, but as an engineer, like, I want to see like concrete like solution, like suggestions about like how do we change, how should we change the system. Like right now I'm seeing a lot of anger, and like I know like the defund police is, I feel like it's more like just a slogan, but it's not the real solution. So as from your experience, like, is there going to be anything coming out of this, and like what should it be?
Someone smarter than me can answer the what should it be question, but I think you're right. I think you're asking about the next step. What the protests have been successful at, I think they've already accomplished the main thing that protests can accomplish, which is that this is all we're talking about right now. Like, that's basically, they have grabbed the national and even international. I was shocked to see the protests in Europe in support. It's like, wow, this is an international thing right now. And because there's an underclass in every country, in every city, like, the only places not protesting are the authoritarian states like North Korea or or in some ways China, like, where things are very tightly controlled. I mean, I know Muslim people in China that probably support this because they're like, yeah, we know what you mean. Like, but it just can't happen there because it's a strong police state, right? So, but they've accomplished the one thing that protests can accomplish, is just to change the conversation. I think when, and you're right, defund the police, I don't know where that started, but it seemed to be like 3 days ago. I wasn't hearing that before then. It's a slogan. I don't think anyone who's serious is proposing that we have cities with no police. That's just crazy. Like, but if we need police, I think what the defund police people mean is that a lot of the budget, like, there was a really good meme I saw that was, it was a picture of police preparing to interact with protesters, and they had riot gear on, they had helmets, they had pads, and they had these big, like, non-lethal guns, and it was basically just really expensive equipment. And then right beside it, it showed a picture of those nurses they ran out of PPE and they were wearing trash bags, and they were saying, like, why is it that the people we're protesting against killing us have more funding than the people we're trying to save our lives, right? Like, why? It's just a matter of priorities. And so what the protests have done is it started this conversation about what we Americans, people who live in America, whether you're a citizen or not, like, what are our priorities in terms of society? Like, do we want to save people's lives, or do we just want to control them and keep them in line and maintain, why are we spending so much money on law and order and police when we don't on public schools? I mean, like, my wife and I have had some issues. I mean, we moved to this neighborhood where we live in because the schools are good, right? They were all number 10, the elementary school they go to. But even then, I noticed, like, wait a minute, even at good schools, the classes still have 32 students in them. Like, and how much individual, even the good public schools are still underfunded here. Like, and so what the protests have accomplished is at least start having conversations. What are our priorities? Do the police really need this much money Or could we change the way that they interact with people in communities? Like a lot of previous generations are used to police being more friendly, or like you would know them, right? And it's like, oh yeah, Officer Wilson lives 2 blocks away from me, and I know it. But one of the things that's happened in the cities is that police can't, they can't afford to live in the cities they police, and so they don't know anybody, and they don't know these people. They either can't afford to live there, or if they're work in the poor areas, they don't want to live there because everything is so segregated now. But so there's a disconnect, and so it's easier for you to demonize or see someone as a potential criminal if you don't know anything about them, and then they don't. But to go back to your original question, which was that, what's the solution? That's going to take and even the protesters, the people who are really serious in the protests are already talking about that. Okay, so what do we do? For me, the biggest obstacle to coming up, or at least talking about solutions, like, yes, you pointed out the problem, we hear you, even among people who are sympathetic, a lot of people are getting tired of the protests, even people who agree with them. Okay, what do we do now? That's always the next question, like, what do we do now? The biggest obstacle to that is there's just a fundamental lack of leadership at the national level. Like, and I it's obvious I'm not a big fan of Trump, but I think I think the fact that he's not even trying to have a conversation, or even, hey, let's get some people together and see what we can do. He can get his Black conservative friends together, if that's probably what he would do, because he wouldn't want to be in the same room with the people who don't agree with him on anything. So fine, get Ben Carson and Clarence Thomas, and call it. Just the symbolic act of trying to intervene would really help, right? Just saying that, that's interesting that you say that. I want law and order. Well, we want, and the other response would be, we want police to stop. Well, okay, show me the information. Let's put a commission together. And yeah, maybe nothing would happen, but at least it would calm people down, right? It would, and maybe, who knows, surprisingly, maybe something could happen. That's what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. The protesters eventually sat down with the police and said, hey, let's have a conversation. This is what we feel. Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's not, we need to have a way to restrain people when their officers' lives are threatened. Okay, when does this happen? Let's review these cases and look at what really happened. And so just the fact that they're talking to each other, without leadership, and some states have this kind of leadership with governors, and that's what we'll see next. I think some of the governors will start working with people to just kind of listen to the protesters, and they may do something, they may not do anything, don't know. But at the federal level, the Justice Department, William Barr, Secretary, what the Attorney General, that's supposed to be his job. His job is supposed to be to manage the policing in America. What's he doing? He's too busy building a wall around the White House and ordering protesters to back off and shooting tear gas. That's what he's been doing. So under Obama, I don't think this would happen. Under George W. Bush, Bush would have handled this a lot better. Like his handling of 9/11 was excellent after the fact. So I'm not saying these things about Trump because I'm anti-Republican or anything. I'm just saying, like, even some Republicans are becoming frustrated. It's like, why is the president silent on this except to say that looting is bad? Like, okay, yeah, we agree with you. We don't like looting either. But it's just shocking, really, that, Reagan would have handled this a lot better. Reagan had some riots on his watch. The president should not be out of the picture. He should be out listening to people, talking to people, get some people together to put some ideas together, and just, it would calm a lot of this down, even if nothing really happens from it, because we know that's how it goes sometimes. But so the next step has to be concrete. Yeah, you're right. Everyone agrees with that. Like, the next step has to be some kind of concrete ideas. My personal idea is that I think we need to have community engagement with police. I think instead of police in these communities saying, no, you're wrong, we didn't do that, and the video comes out, okay, yeah, we did that, we suspended those officers. That's what keeps happening over and over the last 2 weeks. Instead of having this antagonistic relationship with communities, they should talk to them, sit down with them, like, have a town hall. It won't be easy. People are going to yell at them. but that's kind of what you sign up for when you become a public servant. That's why they call it service, right? You're supposed to serve the public. And, you know, the federal level too with Trump, like he won't have these conversations because he doesn't like to hear bad news. He doesn't like to be criticized. He doesn't like to, so without some kind of leadership in doing that, I don't think the protests are going to stop until, because we need to move. That's what can help us move to the next level, is having an adult in the room with power that can say, hey, okay guys, okay, let's sit down, I'll be the referee, let's see if we can come up with something that makes both sides at least somewhat a little happy, and lead to fewer cases like this. Because the Greg Lloyd case was unusual in that immediately afterwards, like chiefs of police around the country all called it murder immediately. That there was no debate about whether or not that was a murder, and so that we all agreed on that. And so it's, you know, it lit them. It was the match that fueled the fire that just, and it's still burning. And I think we need some kind of, we have community leaders that are willing to have these conversations, but we don't have anyone outside of local government who's willing to participate in these conversations. So it's just not, until the next step happens, you're still going to see protests. But if we can get someone in the room, and at least I would love to see a headline tomorrow that said Justice Department to convene a commission to investigate police brutality. I mean, even if it says, does it exist or not, which I think, you know, I would be mad at that headline, but at least that would be better than nothing, right? So, so I just think, I think we do need to move on to the next step. I think people who work on these policing issues can come up with some temporary solutions, some kind of small solutions. I just think my personal view is that police need to get to know their neighbors better. And you do see that on social media. It's like, hey, police officer playing basketball with kids in the park, or, you know, stuff like that. We need more of that kind of thing, because that's the only way that Black people are going to trust the police again. And then that actually, you know, in some communities that might lead to less crime. That might, you know, because a lot of these communities, they don't trust the police. They go to gangs for protection. That's what happens historically in poor communities where they're of any race. Like that's what happened in Long Beach, for example, in the 80s. Poor Cambodian community, they were facing a police brutality problem. So what happens? They formed a lot of gangs, and the gangs, you know, people just decided, I'm not going to call the police anymore. We'll just use the gangs to police. If someone robs my house, I'm going to call a gang member and say, hey, come help me. So, and that never leads to a good thing. That's not a good thing. I like police more than I like gangs. I don't want gangs policing communities, because they're not trained, they're biased, they're violent, you know. So, but when people feel like they can't trust the police, that's where they're going to go. And so I want to create a situation where people trust police again, because they know each other. Okay, sorry, I did it again.
Yeah, 圣经也上来了。Jing is from the OC book club.
The club. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
You remember
Jing,
him, right?
welcome. Hi.
Hey, Scott, how are you? Thank you for
Okay.
this lesson. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah. And any other? But
I have another question.
okay.
So, do you think this is a unifying event, or it makes our society more polarizing?
That's an interesting question. I think it's a unifying event, even though some people are put off by it. I think it can be more unifying because it's, you know, it's designed to be inclusive. Because it depends. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to be, no country, including the US, especially the US right now, we were already divided for one thing. I think there's more unity right now than there were before the protests, because we were like, politically speaking and media wise, it was almost 50-50. Now I think it was more like 60-40. Like, I think it's 60-40 in favor of the protests. That's more unity than we've seen. I think it pulled the left together in some ways, and I think it pulled some moderates over because it's just the evidence is so overwhelming that this is an issue for some people that we've known about that no one would listen to before. So that's a good question. My way of answering the question was that we were already divided. I think this makes us a little more unified, at least because it pulls a few more people together. And one of the things I teach in my class about when I talk about globalization and social media and the internet and things like that, there's so many sources of information right now, but that we have so many people on both sides of the political spectrum. They just believe what they believe and they back it up. You can go online and find information to believe whatever it is you believe. And some of them are reputable, some of them are not. But I mean, that's my problem with Facebook. I don't use Facebook because there's just so much crap on Facebook on both in every direction that if I want to believe that eating grass, eating grass from my yard cures cancer, I could probably find a website that supports that view, even though it's totally wrong, it's against science. And then if I can find that website, then I can find 30 other people who also believe that eating grass cures cancer. And now I've got a social support network spread around the world. I don't have to listen to anybody like scientists. We saw that with COVID-19, right? I'm sure people around the world are looking at Americans like, are y'all crazy? Do you see what happened in China? Why are you not social distancing? And why won't you wear masks? Like I read it on Facebook. My aunt posted this article. It was really interesting that said that masks don't help and I don't want to wear it. It hurts my freedom, and it's every scientist in the world except for one guy or two guys is totally disagreeing with that, but I don't have to listen to it because I have my websites that I found, and it's really difficult. It's difficult to maintain democracy like that because we can't agree on what's true or what's not true. So we kind of live in different worlds. So I think we were already polarized. And I think these protests, they do make some people feel like they've been pushed out. And so some people may feel like it's more polarized, but a lot of people, I mean, I went to a protest yesterday in Buena Park and there were very few black people there. There were only like 4 black people out of 200 or 300. And, I was like, wow, this is great because people are seeing it as a community problem. It's not a black people problem. It's a, what kind of community do we want to have problem? And I think that's very unifying, not for everybody, not 100%, but I think for those who are not 100% comfortable, I think it has unified those people. So that's really poor people, that's working class poor people, it's working class people, it's people of color, it's people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, who are just not as comfortable here. It's offering an opportunity for them to have a voice in creating the kind of society they would prefer to live in, where they don't have to be in fear. I'd like to live in a society where I don't get nervous when police drive behind me on the road, even though I'm not speeding. There's nothing wrong with my car. My license is up to date and everything. And I just hate it when they turn the same way that I turn because I'm thinking, oh God, am I about to get pulled over and why and what's going to happen? So I still feel that way. I hate it. I will turn and go outside of where I'm going. I will make a turn that I didn't need to make and go out of my way and be late for my appointment just so that police officer is not driving behind me. I'd like to live in a place where I don't have to worry about that anymore. And so those who identify with that and those who have the same experience and those who have friends who have experience that they know very well are all unified right now that hey, we don't like this. Like why does this relatively small segment of the population have to live in fear of police when they're supposed to be here to protect us? So that's what I think they've unified, even though it doesn't unify everybody. But I think my basic answer is like, God, we couldn't possibly be more divided than we have been the past 4 years or so. So I think this maybe tips the balance toward unity a little bit, but
一恒有
Okay.
个问题。
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, I just want to say this because I think it's more unified. It was one of the biggest reason is this case specifically. It's like against to humanity. It's like he's like kind of like a perfect victim. This is a perfect case. That's why it's getting international. Like old cases, usually it's like drug dealers on the street, so people don't feel that angry. But this case, George Floyd is almost like totally innocent and he didn't do anything. So it's like it's this extreme unified person. But I kind of, my opinion on the last question about why people can't get out a message, I actually thought about about it for a very long time. And it was kind of funny. I rethought of the lecture you gave us, the panel you talked about, and I realized, and I wrote you the email. I don't know if you read, but I realized every time I talk about the issue, I use the word social class, and you use the word poverty. So, and I went back to all my textbook and my notes, and I did a little bit digging and research, and realized that, like, since the Cold War, since the anti-Marxist, anti-communist in the West, basically in most of the academic research and social, like socialism and research, all those textbooks, they kind to avoid the word of social class. They use material status, they use income instead of calling out the social class. So it's just me personally, I kind of feel like, and they use the political identity to kind of divide people. Like, so for me, somehow it's really hard for the Black community to come up with a message, because it's such a big community. There are rich people, well educated. So if you say, oh, we want better education for Black people, well, like, what then? What about Kim Kardashian? What about those celebrities? They already had that. They had a more priority than lots of people. So instead of like, in socialism, we divided the society like horizontally. So we feel people living in poor, they need resources. People living rich, they already had the resources. But in US, you're dividing people like this way. So Black, men, and like LGBT, all those, you divide people in this group. But in female group, there are people like Hillary Clinton. She had almost everything. And there are poor girls got sexually abused by their boss. That's totally different. How can you come up with one policy that will be able to help the entire group?
Yeah.
That's impossible. So you talked about it's the pool. It was the poverty made the issue. So instead, and you talk about the variety, I definitely agree, like a variety will help, innovation will help people to improve. That's the reason we all came to US to study. Like even now, when my cousin is choosing a country to study abroad, and I still ask him to come to US, because this is the only country you can see the people from everywhere, from the world. You will be able to know if you only be able to study in one country, American is the best choice, because you will say the word literally in this country. That's the variety. But you don't, I don't know, as a apology, you don't put a new species when you're creating diversity, variety. You don't put a new, don't give resources. You don't give more resources to a specific species, and you don't put in new species to already existing community place. But it's just like protecting the environment, letting them grow better. So if you're putting into a human society, like the easiest way to do it, instead of letting more Black people into Stanford, maybe you build like a after school, free after school, have professors like you to giving extra education to the kids who are in need. My parents actually used to be, they are graduating from normal university, they are teachers. They used to be assigned by the government in China to teach in specific poor area to exchange for their tuition. So they used to teach, they are very good teachers. Normally, if you are from a family like poor family, you won't be able to get teachers like my parents. But because of some special government project, so they were assigned to teach some really poor kids. And after they came back, they still offer free classes to poor kids. So instead of just letting more Black people into good universities and making people just assume, oh, Black people are worse than normal people. That's why you need to give them more you need to use those like more numbers in order to make allow them to admit into this college.
Yeah,
Why not
I have to interrupt you for a little bit, because when you used Black people versus normal people, I did that too before, and that's basically saying Black people is abnormal.
Yeah, it's
which
racist
is
itself.
really
I mean, I think
kind of
the variety of the variety policy itself is racist because it's assuming Black people was like some certain race wasn't as competitive as other race. That's why you need to give them more quarters in order to admit them into university. But no, we already know that Black people is not less intelligent. As I sent you the story in China, Chinese people in our stereotype, we believe Black people are smarter than many other race. But the fact they do this, for me, I don't know. I see it as a different type of racist.
Yeah, we are kind of running out of time. Maybe we can collect more questions, or yeah, Scott, do you answer to?
Yeah, can I just? I'll try to keep it short. I know time wise, but the first part about why assign. So why divide the country up by race and say that Black people need more help? Like, why not do it by social class, if that's what I understood your question, right? Why? Because there are Black people across the social. When we talk about these things, one of the things to keep in mind when we're talking specifically about the U.S., and that's why I tried to give a very quick history of slavery to mid-century, 20th century. In America, we had policies, we had laws, we had economic policies like redlining and all the things that happened with real estate that intentionally were designed to align us by skin color and social class, right? So when you talk about poverty in the US, it almost always, yes, there are poor white people, there are poor Asian people, but on the whole, this wealth gap that we talk about, it does align by race. And so, but we're not pushing for policies that are directed at races, even though sometimes people talk about it like it's a quota. If you push for social economic diversity and equity in the United States, is automatically going to help more Black people and Latino people. Yes, some white people will get included in that too, and that's great, because social class is one of the most important variables. But in the US, you can never separate it from race, because so many of our laws were designed to aid white people, right? So many of them up until now. And so, all the way from slavery up through the civil rights movement and even beyond, in some ways, these laws subsidize the creation of wealth for white families, and it disinvested non-white families. And so it sounds kind of crazy that wealth can be aligned by skin color, but we made it true, right? It's like, and so policies like affirmative action, I know that my university now, and I know that Stanford, when I was there, their policies were not about race. They had social class based initiatives too, to do that. And I think, so when we're pushing for change right now, we're not excluding other people. We're emphasizing Black and Latino peoples right now, just because the police thing, the videos, is about a Black man. So we're saying Black Lives Matter, things like that. But it also, most of us who participate in these things, we're being inclusive there. We don't want, we know that, okay, let me rephrase it just as a way to end it shorter. The best predictor for academic success, we know, is not race, right? Like, I know, I'm not saying anyone here is saying that anyone's more intelligent than anybody, but the best predictor for academic success is just wealth, right? And so the people who, Black students on average, because of the lower level of wealth, they don't do as well as Chinese and white kids. I mean, no one's denying that. The issue is, what do we do about it? Is it because they're less intelligent? Is it because they work less? It's just because they have less resources. I was talking to my wife earlier. It's like, thinking about us as a family, me, and I'm putting myself in this boat too because I'm a parent of Asian kids, right? How much money do we spend a month on Kumon and Math Olympiad, YEA that they go to? Like so many supplementary education programs, it almost guarantees that our kids are going to do better on the SAT. I mean, it guarantees it. So should that be the standard that everyone else has to live up to when our public schools are supposed to be free? So that's what I mean by equity. It's those people like us, we don't need more resources. I'm Black, my kids are Black, but we don't, um, we don't, these policies and these changes, I mean, outside of safety, yeah, well, I want changes in terms of there, but in terms of education, affirmative action and things, I'm not the people that need it. My kids won't be the ones who need it. But I would love it if some Asian and some white kids benefited from affirmative action too. And I think sometimes they do, and social class is part of that, but you're going to get, like, okay, 85% of the people that benefit from affirmative action are probably Black and Latino because that's that's who has more barriers to educational success. And so, when you adjust test score, when you measure test scores across racial barriers and you adjust for wealth, Black kids are just as successful as white kids, and Latino kids are just as successful. Everyone can be raised to that level. But what we have is like, it's almost like a disingenuous comparison because you have recent immigrants from East Asia and India that do have wealth. They're educated, they come here, they don't have debt, they don't have the baggage that other communities that have been here a long time have. And you're starting with a clean slate. You're working hard. I mean, they're working hard, they're saving, they're being smart with their money, they're making very good decisions, they're working their butts off. Anytime I hear someone say that Chinese kids are better at math because it's genetic, it's like, no, they work their asses off on it, and their parents make sure they work on it. It's work. It's not talent, it's work. And a lot of cases, and I've seen it among Black and white families, their parents just don't put the work into it. They make jokes. Oh, math is hard. Oh, my kid's not good at math. I've never heard a Chinese parent say that before, that my kid's not good at math, so I'm not going to worry about it. Just go do art. They don't do that. And that's something that other communities can learn from Chinese people. But, it's the same. I compare it with in the 80s and 90s, people would say that Black people are naturally good at basketball. Like, no, it's just we see people that leave the community and become wealthy by playing this sport, and they work at it. When I grew up in North Carolina, we played basketball every day. Like, we played before school, we played at school, we played after school, we played on the weekends. Like, I still wear 2 pairs of socks sometimes just in case I end up in a basketball game. That just became my culture. I can't play anymore, my knees are bad, but it's the same thing, right? Black people are not naturally good at basketball, they just work at it, and people don't see that. They just see NBA on TV, right? Same thing with Chinese. But in terms of resources and things, yeah, it's like when you adjust it, any race really isn't a factor, except that American history has made it a factor, like, because it ties it to social class so closely in American history. And we're trying to, it's improved. The income gap has closed, like, actually, but the problem is you got to look past income and look at wealth. Wealth has not closed. So, and a lot of that, a lot of the animosity across those debates, or just some people that just don't, they look at people who are at the bottom end of the wealth gap and say, like, why didn't you save money? Why didn't you? It's like, well, some people's families, especially white families, it's different. Recent Asian immigrants, it really does complicate the picture a little bit, because it makes it look like, because, recent Asian immigrants, professional immigrants, have been so successful in such a short period of time, it's easy to compare them to Black and Latino communities. It's like, God, we did this in 20 years. Why can't you guys have had 400 years to do this? Why couldn't you get to this level? And well, that's why the history is important. Like, we had laws literally.
Sorry, allow me to disturb you for a second.
Okay. Yeah.
For my concern is mostly because, as you gave the panel, you saying it was the problem with the property. I think was my concern is when people out there keep me talking about race instead of social class, they actually distinguish with the actual problem out there. So that's why they can't come up with policy. That's why it doesn't getting better. That's why it's keeping repeating. That's why it doesn't get out with a solution. That was my concern. I think I'm assuming you probably think about the same issue. That's why you give the panel and telling us it wasn't about the race, but it was about the race, but the race was because it was linked by the pool.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it is, we call it intersectionality now in anthropology, right? Intersectionality, like, in this case, let's say race and social class, you have to look at the really complex ways that they interact. And you have to look at the specific, this is different in China, it's different in Taiwan, it's different in India. You have to look at national history sometimes. And in the US, it's impossible to talk about social class without mentioning race. And so this protest, these movements focus on race just because this unique situation, as you said, this is one of the most shocking videos of a police officer killing someone, because it's, you watch him and you have 4 or 5 people saying that you're killing him, you're killing him, you're killing him, and he had his hands in his pockets. You know, he wasn't worried about it at all. So that's why, you know, I showed that slide earlier. It reminds people of a lynching. It looked like a lynching. And when you watch that video, you kind of take this perspective of the person filming because you feel so powerless, right? You're just like, you're watching someone die slowly and there's nothing you can do about it. And he's got his hands in his pocket and he's not worried about you at all. Like he knows there are no consequences for what he's doing right now. I don't think he meant to kill him, but just the depravity, that's just the cruelty of it, of him. Even after they found no pulse for 3 more minutes, he still had his knee on his neck, right? And like, that's what shocks people, and that's why this movement is focused on Black people, because it connects with the thing that happened 2 days, what was it, 3 days before, the woman in Central Park who called the police and said an African American man is threatening my life. She tried to use the police as a weapon. So that goes to show that, you know, white people understand what, she understands exactly what this is, and she tried to use it. It didn't work, but maybe it only didn't work because they both left before the police didn't get there fast enough. So who knows what would have happened if the police had gotten there faster. Thankfully, the guy just left. They both just left, but that's why everyone was so mad about that. It was like,
Yeah,
you guys, you know
the,
that this is what happened. You knew that they were going to beat him up. They might not arrest him, but they're at least going to put him in handcuffs and then try to figure out what happened. And he was probably going to get his face scratched up and have, you know, he was going to have a bad day, even if they didn't arrest him, right? So that's, and so the George Floyd happened right after that. So, yeah.
Yeah, Scott, we have about like 11 minutes toward 2:30. Maybe
Can I ask
we
a
can.
question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quick question.
Okay.
Here I'm saying Black people is kind of like a political incorrect. 但是在中文里面说黑人，比方介绍您是用黑人教授 ，Do you feel offended?
I don't know. I lived in Taiwan for 3 years. Like, I heard Heron a lot, and you know, I actually, you know, when people say African American versus Black, um, we're diverse about terms. I say African American when I'm at the university, or if I'm giving a talk, I will say African American. But when I'm talking to my friends or something, I say Black. I prefer Black. I think Black is a better term because it's more inclusive. Because if you say African American, then that doesn't include Jamaicans, or that doesn't include Black Canadians. That doesn't include, so Black is a more global term, and I like it more. I think it's, despite the fact that my skin's not black, it's brown, it's not literal, like whatever. White people aren't white either. So I don't mind Black at all. I actually prefer it.
Another question is, do you feel offended if nowadays, at this moment, people say all lives matter? Do you feel it's kind of like a challenge?
I feel like it's a silencing mechanism. It's basically a way for those people to say, shut up, I don't want to hear it. You know, because to anyone who's listening or paying attention, it's very obvious that the slogan Black Lives Matter means Black Lives Matter too. It doesn't, so maybe they should have put a 2 on it originally, but if they said Black Lives Matter too, they would have come up with some other comeback. It's just people who don't want to hear it, and that's fine. It doesn't offend me. I'm not going to fire someone because I heard them say all lives matter. Actually, you might be shocked. I think occasionally some people overreact to that. There was a guy in the news yesterday got fired because they tweeted all lives matter. Talk to them, try to convince them that that's kind of not what this is about. We're not saying white lives don't matter. We're not saying Asian lives don't matter. We're just saying, like, all these things we see on the news make it look like Black lives don't matter to those people, and that you can kill these people and without consequences unless there's video, and even that takes time. Like, so yeah, it just I don't get mad when I hear that. It's disappointing sometimes, but I think it's the same way some people use the term politically correct. Oh, you're just being political. Okay, so now you're not going to listen to me. You think I'm just trying to sound cool or something. I'm like, no, we really believe this stuff. Maybe it was a branding error. They should have said Black Lives Matter too or something. Like there was a slogan
Thank
in this.
you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's just I tweeted that one time. I retweeted something. Someone said something like that, and I said and I just tweeted again. Black Lives Matter too. There. Does that make you feel better? Like nothing. Does that? That's more accurate? And they didn't respond to that. I was like, yeah. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It just means two. Yeah. So and it doesn't say only, right? So.
Hey, Scott, how are you? Can I ask a
Oh,
question?
good. Yeah.
I think we have known the Kanye West before, but this time we do know I think the Candace Owens, from a debate from this time.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of people can have a different opinion, even among the same ethnicity, even among the Chinese, the same thing. I just want to ask you, what do you think about the Candace Owens from the perspective of African American, eyes,
I,
and how, because I really want to know more about her, even though I totally disagree with her.
Yeah, she's what my opinion of her, I think she's a con artist. She was totally liberal 10 years ago. People went back and looked at her social media feed. She was an Obama supporter. She worked for someone in the Democratic administration before. Now she's totally reversed. I think she says these things to get attention. Like she said, I will not celebrate George Floyd as a hero because he sold drugs before, and 10 years ago he pointed a gun at someone. It has nothing to do with what happened to him like a few weeks ago. I mean, what was he doing at the moment, right? It's just like the same with the Aubrey case in Georgia a few weeks ago, right before this, right? That kid was just running, and those two white guys just came out and they just killed him, and because he wouldn't answer their questions and stop, and he tried to get in, he grabbed the gun that was right in his face, and so the other guy shot him, and it's like, oh, I was protecting myself. Um, Candace Owens, I think she's being funded to say this stuff, and it gets her attention. It's whatever. I I don't read or listen to her lectures because I just read the headlines and it makes me angry and I can't go past that. No, just there are other black commentators and they know they get the attention. Kanye West, Kanye West considers himself a free thinker. You know, before this instance, the most famous thing Kanye West ever said was when there was a fundraiser for Hurricane Katrina, right? And he was on stage with Mike Myers from Saturday Night Live, and they read the script, and then Kanye West just took the microphone and said, "George W. Bush does not care about black people." So how does this guy become like a Trump supporter? He's mentally unstable. Everybody knows that. I don't really try to figure out. It's really difficult to figure out what he means. He was at the protest donating money. He donated $1 million to one of the BLM protests like last week, and he was out. Someone took pictures of him out there. So he's just all over the place. His music is all over the place. But Candace Owens, I don't take her seriously, but I know some people do, and especially her words carry a lot of weight with some conservatives because she's black. They're like, hey, here's a black person saying these things, but a lot of the things she says are just textbook racism. I mean, it's a white person in a conservative outlet saying what Candace Owens has been going around saying right now would probably be fired from their job, but she can say it because she's black, right? So she's very useful to that movement, right? She's very useful to have a black person saying these things that they wish they could say, and that's the thing. I just don't take her seriously, and I wish her luck. Yeah, good for her, but I think she does it for attention, and there's probably some kind of financial. I don't know. I haven't looked into her background enough to know, but she's probably being paid by someone to do this, or at least benefiting from it in some way, because it just doesn't make sense. I don't think all black people have to have the same opinion, but hers is so extreme. Like there are black conservatives. I don't like Clarence Thomas, but I think he's a legitimate judge. I just don't agree with anything he ever says. But I don't question his legitimacy, though. He made it there. I didn't like the Anita Hill stuff. I don't think he should have been voted on, but I say that about all conservatives. But that's what we do. It's a democracy. That's what we do. We argue about stuff, and but you can only do that if both sides are being honest, right? And that's the thing. People like like Candace Owens, she's not being honest. She just throws fire bombs. You know, she's a rioter. She's a verbal rioter, basically, and she just wants to make people mad, and it works sometimes. So yeah, I don't
Yeah, I
know.
appreciate it. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I think she's sharp. You know, honestly speaking, I think she's sharp. I watched a few of her videos, even though I disagree with her, you know, the opinion, but I think she's sharp. You know,
She is that's what makes me mad about her. That I hate it when people who are, if someone's just dumb and not very sharp and say things I don't disagree with, I'm easier on them. But if I can tell that you're intelligent and you're saying these things, that just frustrates me more than anything. Intelligence to me does not mean you agree with me. It means that I know you're being honest and you're being genuine and you have this opinion that I don't agree with, but hey, let's talk about it. We may not even, no one's, we may not change our opinions, but at least I want to know that you truly believe these things you're saying right now and it's based on reality. And so people like her, I just don't see it. And because she is not a dumb person, so I don't know. That's why it's so disappointing. I'm okay with the fact that she's Black and saying these things because I think there should be a diversity of opinions. I taught a class once with someone from the Africana Studies department at Cal State Long Beach, and I could not have disagreed more with someone in my life. I thought it was like, hey, two Black men teaching in a class together, let's have fun. We couldn't agree on anything. He was a reversed racist. Like, to me, that's what I thought. He was a Black supremacy. He believed in Black supremacy and all this stuff. Everything's about Africa and a long time ago and civilization and all this stuff, which is fine. But he just had no interest in any ideas unless they were created by Black people. And I just can't, as an anthropologist, I can't support any kind of supremacy. And that was the worst semester of my life. I hated it. I didn't even want to go to class some days, because and we stopped being friends after that. I think we were friends before that, but once I heard all these ideas that I just disagree with. But that's fine. I don't dislike him. He wasn't a bad person. We just didn't, there's all kinds of ideas. And there is no, as Yi Hung was saying, there is no one unified Black community. And that's part of what's hard with policy, right? But we can at least try to help. And for me, it's beyond Black people. Sometimes when I say, you'll hear me slip into, I'll say Black and Latino, right? But there's also Black and Latino and Asian and white. Like, it's all, if you scoop up the lower classes, you're going to, by default in America, you are going to help a lot of Black people. Middle class and upper class Black people like me don't need the help. But I do want to make sure that my kids don't face discrimination just on skin color, because that does happen sometimes. I think it happens with Asian people too. Like, there's everybody, even white people face discrimination occasionally, not as much as they complain about right now, but everybody faces discrimination. I want to make sure my kids, because there is some purely skin color based discrimination that happens, even if it's not spoken. But in terms of wealth and finance and opportunities, my kids are fine. Like, they might not go to Harvard. I don't want them to go to Harvard. I'd rather go to Stanford, but but they might not go to Stanford. That's my top choice because I went there and I think it's cool. But if they don't, they'll be fine. It's like for some people with the Ivy League, like, okay, yeah, you didn't get into Harvard. I'm sorry you had to go to Princeton. I think you're going to be okay. Like, you go to Brown. I'm sorry you had to go to Brown. You'll be fine. It's, and I feel that way about my kids too. If they don't get into Stanford, I'd be totally fine with them going to Berkeley or UCLA or somewhere like that. Just whatever. But I think there is skin-based discrimination that we can try to deal with. But the deeper thing, and with Yi Hung, I totally agree. Social class is the way to go, but don't forget race too, for me, right? So
yeah, my perspective, because I'm actually a communication major and focusing on policy, and my undergraduate background is industrial engineering. So for me,
you want to fix the problem.
Yeah, I want more efficiency. I feel like this is a better solution. Why you go a different direction? I understand the background. I still feel like it's just not efficient enough.
That's that's a debate the left is having right now. Like, that's the thing. That's the conflict between far left like Bernie Sanders and the moderate left, right? It's help everybody or you know, social class, but then the other people are identity politics, identity politics, identity politics. I don't think you can be purely one or the other, but they have to be considered together. But we just have to find, you
Yeah,
have to
need to
find
put
a,
it together and find a better
you need to
match
find
to
a
someone.
balance. You need to find a balance that works for policy. And for me, I think something that doesn't get discussed enough. I mean, you have to find a way to do it that doesn't completely that antagonizes as few white people as possible, because some white people are going to be, because without them, none of this changes. You know, that's why I like about these protests. We need them, and we can't just push them out, because I know some people who agree with me who are just like, yeah, white people need to pay back, and I want my 40 acres and a mule, you know, from reparations and stuff like, you know, that doesn't, it's not going to help. We can't, regardless of what you think about the people who have benefited most from American history, we need their help. We need their help, or we need their cooperation, or we need them to realize that we can all, it would be better for them too, like if we make some of these changes. But yeah, class is
Okay.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, Scott, it's at
Oh, is that 2:30?
2:30.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe if people want to stay, we can stay until 3, but feel free to log off if you don't
We
have
can do it. We can
any
do it again
further
sometime.
questions.
I'm
Yeah,
totally
we'll do
willing
it
to do it
another
again
time.
sometime.
This is Saturday.
This is interesting to me. Like, I'm learning too. Like, I think this is one of the things, like, okay, so I'll leave you with this. Without the protests, would this have happened? You know, like, you know, it's, without the protests, this is the kind of good thing that can happen. And that I'm not here to educate anybody, you know, I'm just exposing, it's more about exposure to ideas. And so,
Scott, I just saw someone
Oh.
with the Dr. Basher. I don't know who invited this person, and I don't know this person, but feel free to jump in, Dr. Basher.
I want to comment that I'm really impressed by you sharing your personal experience, because we all hear that you say a Black person, as long as you follow the rule, you won't get into trouble. But from your experience, you could get into trouble, even you follow every single rule, because you could get angry, you rush into some places stopped by the police. So I think I did not know that before, because I thought just living in this country is a good.
That's also kind of eye-opening for a lot of people. I think the whole event, like even for me, I lived with Scott for more than 14 years. Some of the things he covered during the last seminar and today's, I didn't know either. It's like the picture of lynching and putting together parallel to each other with the incident. It's very disturbing. And
your analogy of Japanese with Chinese, that's very important too, because I didn't think about that. Yes, why there's so many Chinese people still hate Japanese nowadays, right? And you hear with the whites.
Yeah, it's the thing. It's like it's a different. Yeah, I just thought of that this morning when we were talking, and I was like, well, yeah, we still live with our equivalent of Japanese, but yeah, we still live the consequence, and the people still live side by side, and you've got, you know, and we don't want to blame contemporary white people. They didn't do this stuff, but their ancestors did, and they need to admit that they're benefiting from it. And so maybe, you know, if we can find a way to do that. I taught a whole class just about whiteness in American history at Stanford. It was one of the first classes I ever taught at the university level, and it was controversial back then. I don't think it would, and then for a while it wasn't, and then now it probably would be controversial again. I'd probably end up on some news network or something, but and you know, it's like, I appreciate you saying that, Alice saying that about, I mean, yeah, that's the thing people don't get. Like, people do, when they see these incidents, usually when a unarmed Black person is killed by police on video, there was a struggle, or they fought back or something like that, and they ended up being killed. Okay, we can argue about that, but this case was different because he didn't commit the crime that he was being accused of. In the end, they found out, and you know, he didn't. The other videos showed that there was no resistance. There was no reason for them to put him on the ground like that, and that was so shocking. And to me, it looks like I'm not the only person that said this. It looks like a lynching, and if you're not familiar with the history of lynching, I mean, it was, 60 to 80. These were public events, and they were not even among white people. They weren't controversial. It was just like, hey, they're going to lynch this guy at 4 o'clock. You want to go? Just like we talk about protests right now. Like, hey, you want to go watch? And they take pictures. They pose. They dress up. And they take pictures. And there was no trial. This was not the judge, the police, or anything. It was the whole community would come out to kill this person, and we remember that. It's like, and so when we see stuff like the Boyd thing, it reminds us of and I think a lot of younger Black people had forgot, weren't conscious of this stuff. They're learning about this stuff right now too, and it's making them angry. I've never shown Leah any of those pictures and things like that because they're young and I don't want to have nightmares. But at some point, that's the kind of thing you have to tell your kids, like, this is the country you live in, right? And this is barely 100 years. This is just a little over 100 years ago. This is the country you live in. So don't forget that. And when things like this happen, yeah, people get emotional. And in terms of following the rules, yeah, usually there's a struggle. People say, oh, why do they resist? Why do they get angry? If they just do what the police say, they're going to be okay. Well, that worked for me. I mean, when I would get pulled over at Stanford, I knew that if I showed them my ID, I was going to be okay because they would not, my status as a Stanford student would save me. And it did, like, at least twice. Like, if I knew that, hey, can I see your license? And I would give them my license and my Stanford ID number, my ID card, right? Because I'd hand them to them at the same time. They go, oh, you're a Stanford student. So yeah, it's a way to cancel out my Blackness. They're like, oh, okay, so I'm not going to hassle you. But other people may not be the same. I mean, it's one time I got pulled over. She said my tail light was out, but they made me get out of the car and look at the tail light. And the whole time she's talking to me, she had her hand on her gun. Like, sorry, I think I'm glitching. Okay. Yeah, she had her hand on her gun the whole time I'm talking, and I remember thinking, if I sneeze right now, is she gonna shoot me? And again, there was no problem. I hadn't done anything, and I just so now through no fault of my own, I'm in what could potentially be a life or death situation. I'm just trying to go home. I wasn't doing anything. So it's just that kind of stuff that happens occasionally that that's what the protests are designed for too. It's like, just try to understand, you don't see the world this way, but there are people who do, and they're not crazy, and they're not just complaining. They don't want a handout. They just want to be treated fairly. So who's Crab Meat? I don't know who that is. But
you guys watched that was a popular Singapore drama. Was when I was little, so probably about like 90s. But basically, Kunlun was the name for the Black people used to live in mostly Tang Dynasty and sometimes before Tang. So basically, they are parts from part of them are from like South Asian islands, and parts of them are African people from. But basically, in the Chinese stories, in the Chinese legend stories, Kunlun Nu, it has a Tang Dynasty novel called Kunlun Nu, and then it was made into Peking operas like Kunlun Jianxia Zhuan, Dao Hongjiao, all those stories about Black people lived in China. Most of the time, they were pictured as vigilantes who saved the day, and they are usually like Robin Hood type of characters, and most of the time it's they are pictured as
I got the Kunlun Nu part, but I don't think that's kind of like I just don't see that in the current Chinese society right now. But that's okay.
Because the Chinese people forgot about it, but that was in our history.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
I can add a little bit about the last question because I was in journalism school, and one of my classmates is following a case study about Black people in the prison. One thing she mentioned to me was she said that there are a lot of Black people got arrested because their first instinct when they saw a policeman is just running away. So the police saw a person running away, so they chased them and then arrested them for resisting arrest. And they can't afford to pay the bail, so they will ended up in the prison for a very long time for not doing anything. It's basically for running away from police. That was she had a lot of cases about this type of situation. It's just really stupid but that's just the things happening.
Yeah, like one of the things, like when we talk about reform, some of the cities like Atlanta, someone asked earlier what cities have a good record of reforming policing in these communities. And one of the things that Atlanta has done recently is they, and a couple of other cities, like Atlanta, Seattle, a couple of other cities have done away with exactly what you were just talking about, cash bond. Like, so arrested for a minor defense.
You use it for what?
Yeah. Arrested for a minor defense, and then a minor offense, and then go to jail, and then to await trial in jail, like, you know, to pay, they would set bond at $10,000, which they can't come up with that. So then that means they have to wait for their trial in jail rather than going home. And you know, and it's arbitrarily set by a judge. And so you would have these cases where people are, you know, oh, unpaid traffic tickets, too many, get arrested, end up spending 3 months in jail because they can't afford the cash bond. So a lot of cities like Atlanta has done away with that. They'll just let the judge decide, is this person dangerous? Can they go home and wait for trial? Do they need to stay in jail? So just decide, don't bring money into it. Like, so, because it's just a tax on poor people, basically. So, so that's one of, you know, that's the kind of things. And yeah, there are people, that's one of the things when Black parents talk to their kids, that was one of the things we discussed, was that, you know, that was one of the things people say that they tell their kids, that don't just run when you see a police officer, because that gives them a reason to chase you, right? And then you look guilty. And so even though you might be frightened, just talk to them, stay calm, be polite. Sometimes even that's not enough, but usually that will do it. I was always polite when I get hassled by police, and again, it hasn't happened to me. I haven't had anything like this in years, but just be polite. You know, some people say that, oh, they want you to act like a slave, right? Because some people tell their kids, like, say yes sir and no sir. I don't think so, sir. You know, I always say sir or ma'am and stuff like that. It's about being obedient, being subservient. You know, they want you to submit, right? So, and some people, yeah, I don't say that, but yeah, be polite, and try not to get angry, but you can't control that sometimes. Like sometimes some people are just hot-headed, they get angry, but Black people aren't allowed to do that around police officers. And so, you know, if one of my kids got pulled over and the police officer was just asking a lot of questions and they got mad, because my kids, you know, I know Leah and Kai, they both got their tempers. Leah has a temper. Like, I know she would, and now she's politicized. So I would be so mad at her if you know, like, she took an attitude, because I think she should understand that you got to control your anger, even if the police are doing something unfair. Black people aren't allowed to talk back to police officers like some people are. So anyway, yeah, I'm breaking up again.
Yeah, I got kicked out a little bit just
Me
now.
too. Yeah.
And I think you talked about the community engagement for the police officer. That was a really good example. The kind of New Jersey Police Department reforming did exactly what you said, and it was the criminal rate was down a lot. But for me, it's I don't know if it could be a sustainable policy, because you know, you talked about the police do more community engagement, and so they can do the job better. But technically, you need to be person who was at least talented enough to be able to perform that. But the way they did in Canada, they lowered the police income even more, and they cut the number of the policemen working now. Basically, they cut the funding, they cut the resources, and expecting the policemen to do a better job, which they did. But it feels like it's not something that's copyable, because you see the Minnesota police officer, they already received like 17 warnings about that, 17 complaints about that policeman. They didn't fire him because it's really hard to recruit another person who can still do a good job, which is impossible for that pay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Can we move on to some other questions?
Scott, did you feel discrimination in China?
No, it's different. But it's different. Like, but it's different. I don't feel discrimination. I feel otherized, and I feel like I feel
Maybe just curiosity.
yeah, it's curiosity, and everybody wants to take a picture of with me and stuff, and that's kind of weird. But I don't feel Taiwan either. Um, I never felt like I never felt like discriminated against. I tried to teach English one time, and they didn't. I tried to teach English one time, and they wouldn't hire. Like, what was it? Da, 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 da. Yeah, I can't remember. I felt like they didn't want to hire me because um, they thought I know part of the reason they didn't want to hire me was because I spoke Chinese and they didn't like I don't know, it was weird. But I saw Asian Americans discriminated against more than me in terms of teaching English. So yeah, I don't know. And it's not like here. I was never bothered by police in China. Everybody was very friendly in China. I never felt the kind of discrimination I feel here, and I don't feel a whole lot here now, but because of my status and social class. But um, I never, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I've been annoyed in China, like when someone tried to rub my hand to see if the blackness came off or something. Like one time, that was funny. I laughed, but that was kind of weird. I have a tattoo I got in Taiwan, and the artist thought that the black ink wouldn't show up on my skin so we had a whole argument about is my skin black or brown. That stuff is funny, but that's not, you know, I never had anyone not let
Perfect.
me into a store. I never had anybody follow me around the store. So another thing that black people complain about a lot uh, and that did happen through from college to grad school. Yeah, you do see that if you go into a big department store, security guards will follow you, and it's very obvious. They try to make it not obvious, but it's very obvious. um so yeah, stuff like that. I never had anything like that. I never had seen anything like that in China, so yeah, it doesn't matter.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey
So at
Scott, I
least
have
they
a
took
question.
pictures with you, not took pictures of you.
Both. I would get people that would follow me online. This is annoying. I'd rather they ask, even if I'm annoyed. If I'm annoyed because it's just happening too much, I get a little annoyed sometimes. But I know they don't mean any harm. But what I don't like is when people will follow me around with their phones and they act like they're using their phones, but it's very obvious that they're taking a video of me to show people. And so that they're obviously doing that. That I don't like, because that's kind of like an invasion of privacy. Like if you want to take a video of me or take a picture, fine, ask me, even if I'm annoyed. But yeah, that gets annoying, and I don't like when people touch the kids or bother the kids. That's really annoying. But that's not, that would never. I joked with Bella one time, several times. I told other people too. It's like when I come back to California, when I've been in China for several months or something, like I kind of miss it when I come back, because it kind of makes you feel like a celebrity. Even when I get annoyed, it gets old, but when I come back, I'm like, wow, no one notices me. I'm just normal now. So I like it. I mean, I like it a little bit. So it's just totally different. It's like if I lived there, maybe it would be different. I don't know, but yeah, I haven't lived there long enough. I've never lived in China long enough to really like get a job and go to school and things like that. So maybe it'd be different. Okay.
And it's kind of different also nowadays from the time you were in Taiwan or China.
Yeah, it's different. It's more diverse
Yeah.
now. I know Beijing, there's been black people there for a long time, so like it's not as big. Wuhan, I saw a lot of Africans in Wuhan too, so it wasn't. I mean, yeah, you still get it, but it's not. There's nothing structural about it, right? That's not structural discrimination. That is, um, uh, that's just personal curiosity or bias, even if it is like, yeah. I really can't remember. I'm trying to think any negative things people said to me or discriminatory things in China. No, I never heard anything. I don't think people
Well,
would though. I don't think they would say anything if they did feel that way. So.
well, I think a lot of people would say there are plenty of discrimination in China. It's just not racial because, the country is very homogeneous. There's but other degrees of discrimination, but that's beyond the point of this
Yeah,
conversation.
there's the Xiaoshu means, right? Like that they tell me, and the university I work with in Wuhan is Xiaoshu means, like they and they talk about some things, especially the ones that are Muslim, like Hui or Uyghur people. Like they talk about stuff, but you know, they're a small minority. They're usually out, not as many in the cities and stuff. So they talk about it, but for them, their history is different. But I did find that in Taiwan, some of the ways that people talk about diversity are very similar to what happens here. And so in my dissertation at Stanford, I actually argue that Han Chinese are the white people of China, right? It's like when it comes, because I was working with Aboriginal and Shaoxu Minzu people, right? I was working with them with, and yeah, it's kind of the thing. There's a whole thing. I don't want to get too far into it because it would be like a whole lecture, but you know, the people who consider themselves to not have culture and to that they're just normal, everybody else has culture and stuff like this. The same way that white people talk about themselves here, Chinese people in China talk about themselves. So yeah.
Can I ask Scott, so from your life experience in the last 30, 40 years, do you think in general American is getting better on this racial discrimination or worse?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I don't know. I think definitely materially our lives are better now than they were 30 years ago. I mean, obviously I was only 20 at the time, but I think, and that's just because, you know, social class wise, yeah, black people are, there's a bigger black middle class now and upper class than there was 30 years ago. But I think it goes in cycles sometimes. I think there's a period where things improved rapidly, and then there was a backlash against that. So we take a step back. I think it goes in cycles. I think we've been in a downward cycle in the last 5 years, mostly because of the housing crisis. Just like COVID-19, the housing crisis also hit black people harder than other people in 2008. It affected everyone, went down, but they went down, you know, further than everyone else. And then when the recovery started, they made less progress than everyone else. And so I think it has, you know, but that's just economics. In terms of discrimination, I think I would say a little bit better, because I think social media has allowed some like discriminatory and racist things to propagate more. White supremacy is more popular now than it was 20 years ago, and I really do give the credit to Twitter and Facebook, and it's just so easy for them to find each other and grow their movements that yeah, they're just like, it's so easy for them to grow their movements that I think it's, those ideas are out there, but I don't think it's totally, I don't think it's worse than it was 30 years ago, but I think we're a little bit better. Yeah. We still have ways to go. And that's why it's part of the anger, right? We thought we were past all these things, but these things keep happening. So what time is it? Almost 3? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott, I have a last question maybe. If you think more and more African American people join like policemen or government job, will think it will definitely improve the current situation?
Say it again. If it broke up.
If more and more black people work as a policeman instead of like white people to be that kind of job, do you think it definitely improve the current?
Maybe in a little bit. Part of the reason the protests are talking about cops, I don't think, one thing I like about the current protests is that they're not, well, some people are saying white cops, but you know, black police officers commit these crimes too. Police brutality is not just white police, it's also black police. And I actually said to one of my students one time, we were talking about it, it's like police officer is kind of an ethnicity now. Like black police officers will side with the police usually. They commit police brutality a lot of the times. And so, you know, it's having more black police officers would be good. I think it'd be a good thing to encourage more of them to go to police academy and study criminal justice, and maybe they will. I think this global protest movement about police reform will encourage some black college students to go into police, but there are already a lot of them, and they weren't the solution so far. They're not going to solve it. So But I think in some small cases, yeah, it could help, because at least they'll know more about the people they're in if they're from the same area or something. So, yeah. Yeah. So we wrap up now, like on it's like
So
3 o'clock.
Scott, maybe
Yeah.
just one last question. Sorry, I
Okay.
joined pretty late, so I joined at 2, so I only got here half of. What do you say? I
Okay.
don't know whether my question was already repeated. So in your previous lecture, you mentioned, yeah, it's the lack of the leader from both sides. So I was wondering, what's your opinion like, or what's your, what kind of leader like you think we should have for, especially for the Black community? Because I think we are very lucky. Everybody was very lucky. We have the June Luther Kings, right, in the 1980s. It's actually make that movement. But looks like now there is no strong
There's
leadership.
no. I think it's gonna have to be from inside the government. And they don't have to even necessarily be Black. We just need a facilitator. Like they don't have to be. I'm not a big proponent. I mean, I don't think Martin Luther King would work now because I don't think people would listen to, Martin Luther King was working with a generation that grew up with Jim Crow laws where Black people were legally subjugated and they were used to sitting in the back, used to get on the back of the bus. They knew you can't raise your voice at white people in public. In public, you do whatever white people say, even if they're not police officers. That generation was used to that. And so when people say that Martin Luther King's protest was nonviolent, yeah, they were nonviolent, but they got attacked with dogs and water cannons and all, so it was very violent. It just was all coming from the police. I don't think this generation could do that. I don't think Black political activists right now could not do that because they didn't grow up like that. Like they are used to, thankfully, because of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, we didn't grow up with that kind of stuff. And so we're not gonna, it's hard for this generation to do that. But in terms of what kind of leadership, I would hope they would not be from the church. I know the Black churches do a lot of great things, but in a lot of ways, they're also very conservative. And I don't mean politically conservative. I just mean in terms of strategically conservative, and also socially conservative in some ways. It's a different dynamic now. So I think celebrities and entertainers and athletes have to play a part, and I like that some of them do because so many kids look up to them and so many people listen to them. I think people like LeBron James is but is he going to come up with policy? No, but he's got a lot of resources. I mean, he built a school for poor kids in his old neighborhood, like a private school that's free for poor kids to help them prepare for college. And that's not going to save the world, but that's going to help that neighborhood. It's like so. But in terms of policy shifts, I think more Black people, and we're seeing it already. I think more Black people should run for political office locally. And the churches can play a part because some people really listen to them, but I'm okay if the church is not involved here. I think we need more mayors and governors and city council people and people on the school board. Like you never see Black people or run for school board or something. I mean, get in there, and I mean, I'm including myself. I've never run for office. But yeah, I don't know. But you're right. In terms of generally speaking, I think regardless of whether they're Black, white, or Asian, I think we need leaders who are willing to get people together and talk about stuff like we're doing here. That's what we need. And we just don't, we have it on some places, but we just need it at the federal level. And that doesn't even have to be you don't have to be conservative or liberal to do that. That's just leadership doesn't have a political party. It's just, hey, okay, y'all are upset. Let's talk about it. Let's get a group together. Let's study it. I don't take this personally. It's just like we have a president who takes it all personally and doesn't even want to talk about it. And so that's just really, like I said, like your previous Republican presidents would have dealt with this way better just because they wouldn't be like just sheltering themselves away and trying to make it all go away. So I don't know, but that's a good question though. Yeah, I don't know. People don't listen to I'd say more academics, but people don't listen to us academics. like Elizabeth Warren didn't get very far. Like she was my preferred candidate if you're wondering. Like I was for Elizabeth Warren, but they don't like, nobody likes professors. Like we talk too much. Like so.
Yes, you talked enough today. Now it's 3 o'clock.
Okay, with that note. Okay.
Yeah. Any last minute question? Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Let's
do it again sometimes.
some other time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. See you
Yeah,
guys.
very much.
Try it out.
Very helpful.
Bye.
Okay. All right. Bye. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye.